Joining us on that panel tonight, the former Cabinet Secretary to the Government of India, Mr. TSR Subramaniam, Senior Supreme Court Advocate Harish Salve, Dalit writer and activist Kancha Elaya, also joining us from the BSP, Mr. Sudhindra Bhadoria. Let me ask Mr. TSR Subramaniam, what would something like this do to meritocracy in this country? Is this reverse discrimination, as many argue, if we take it as far as promotions?
Well, reverse discrimination, yes, I think we are bringing, instead of doing, I personally feel reservation at entry is a very good thing. We have to reverse the historical injustice of centuries. I think on that I am very, very clear. I am also very clear that it has not done too much damage to the quality of service over the last 20, 30 years. More damage has been done by politics. But leaving that aside, here, once a person enters government service, he is no more a citizen. He is no part of an infrastructure. Services and infrastructure, roads, electricity, etc. You don't discriminate between A and B. He is not a Dalit engineer or a Sikh engineer or a caste engineer. He is a government engineer. It is like you don't distinguish between electricity, etc., etc. Your question was, will it damage? It will kill the system. I will give you the reasons. I will give you two examples and come to the principle. Suppose you have a colonel superseding 100 generals and becoming the chief of staff. That will be the end of our army. If you have a district judge superseding high court judges and supreme court judges becoming chief justice of India, in course of time that is going to come, reservation there, that sector is also going to come now, you are going to finish off the judicial system also. The point is, would you, when seniority and merit are the two basic criteria, seniority at early stages in a hierarchy, increasingly merit becomes a factor. At higher levels, merit is the only factor. You inject a new principle called caste. So, is our Prime Minister a Sikh or is he a Prime Minister? Is our Home Minister a Dalit or is he a Home Minister? So, I think we are confusing now. This is the service. You cannot distinguish between A and B. The only distinction can be on the basis of merit and seniority. The moment you are going to do violence to every single institution in the country. And one last point. If in a system, somebody enters the system at a particular level, he is your trainee. 5 years later, he is your colleague. 5 years later, he is your boss. Yeah. Now, would you accept that, unless he has got merit, on the basis of caste or community, will you accept that? Will you not do violence to the system? And if that person is decent, he will be embarrassed. If the person is not decent, he will kill you. These are the harsh realities. I think
you feel it will completely kill institutions in this country. As you said, you think it's completely absurd. Mr. Bhadoria, obviously we understand that the BSP has a certain politics here, and that is a reality we have to live with. But does it go a step too far when you extend it to promotions? How can that be justified? The Supreme Court, when it struck down the Mayawati government's policy, said that there was just no data that the government had come up with to justify why these kind of reservations were there.
You see, in the last session of the parliament, this was raised by the BSP leader, Behan Mayawati ji, and the government had promised that they shall take it up with the other parties and come out with a solution to this issue. And again this issue had to be raised in this parliament, but let me tell you, there is about 250 million people who have been living a life which been deprived, subjugated with all kind of inequalities, and it is therefore that this preferential treatment has been demanded. And now let me come to the logic why this preferential treatment and promotion should be given. You see, there is a glass ceiling for those people when you qualify into the services. There is no provision wherein they can move up in the services. So therefore, it is required that if you want to do away with this unequal system which has existed for not centuries, for thousands of years, then I think you will have to give preferential opportunity in the system, and also during the promotions.
So why weren't you able to back that up with data? Why weren't you able to back that up with data when you were in power in UP? Because previous Supreme Court judgments have also said that you need to back this up with data, which you were not able to provide.
No, this is a national issue. This is not only concerning UP, and let me tell you, there is enough data. You go to any, you see, you don't need data for this. You go to the villages, you go to the district headquarters, you go to any Mufassil town, you will see who are the people who are in the bureaucracy heading those systems. It is nowhere you will find people belonging to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes heading these institutions of bureaucracy or of governance. It is only after this affirmative action some people have been able to get into services. Therefore, it is essential, and in order to do justice, this parliament should on 22nd deliberate upon this. Most of the opposition parties are supporting the stand taken by Behan Mayawati in the parliament.
Mr. Harish Salve, how do you see it? And explain to us, particularly in the context of how the Supreme Court has looked at this issue. If the government does go ahead with this, which it is planning to do, and I don't think any political party will have any other choice but to support this, how does that play out vis-a-vis the Supreme Court?
Let me tell you, since I've been in the middle of all these battles for the last 10-15 years, what has been going on in court. I mean, we have heard a lot of the political rhetoric which you just heard 2 minutes back, and I don't want to join issue. When it comes into the court, it has to be a lot more cold reasoning and not emotional rhetoric. When we first were able to show the Supreme Court that this glass ceiling is a myth, the figures are that yes, if you do a global check, the percentage of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe is not as high in the services as it is in the population, but then there are other social endemic causes, including lack of education, which trigger that. And if you give free education, nobody grudges that. But as you go up the pyramid, the concentration goes on increasing. So giving reservation and promotion distorts affirmative action to the point where it becomes reverse discrimination. That was demonstrated on statistics. That is why in the Supreme Court, in Mandal's case, where it upheld the OBC quotas, said, however, no reservation and promotion. Promptly, an amendment is brought to the Constitution. The second rule we were able to show is the catch-up rule, which Mr. Subramaniam was talking about. That what happens is when you sort of zip past your colleagues, it is chaos. And what happens when you're zipping past your colleagues is the whole picture gets distorted. And at the top, you have a concentration. In Punjab, for example, we were able to show that for years, the chief engineer was scheduled caste. The number 2 rank was all scheduled caste. The number 3 rank was all scheduled caste. All this because of the distorted seniority. That is why the Supreme Court, in 2 judgments, said they brought up the catch-up rule, etc. And they laid down the principle saying once your senior is promoted, his old seniority will revert. So you get the benefit of promotion. The so-called glass ceiling is then dealt with. You get the benefit of promotion. But when your senior comes back, he gets his old seniority. Again, a constitution amendment. Now, we challenged all these constitution amendments. The Supreme Court was told by the government that these are enabling powers which we will use where the situation on the ground is such that we are able to show you statistically that there is gross inequality. On that basis, the Supreme Court upheld it. What do? On the same figures, they promptly go and re-legislate. So the court said, where are the figures which you said you would bring forth to show gross inequality? Not this political rhetoric of, go to the villages and have a look. You have the figures in services. Let me also tell you, after 1930, you haven't had a caste census in India. If you have a caste census in India, you will rip society. And without that caste census, we have some stupid 1930 list, the authenticity of which the author had himself questioned in the British days when it was made. And we go on making reservations. Okay, this is very clearly a political step.
Exactly.
And we have been fighting this. Now we will have to see in Supreme Court how they go further.
India's #1 news app just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.